Ambassador Daniel Foote, the United States Special Envoy for Haiti, has resigned in protest at the mass deportation by the U.S. of Haitians that are gathered on the U.S. border with Mexico. Now, to join us to discuss the ongoing turmoil faced by displaced and deported Haitians is Kevin Pina of the Haiti Info Project. Kevin, a very good morning to you. We've seen visuals coming out of the U.S. About all of those Haitians removed from that border post. But let's start with why they were there before we talk about why they were deported.
Well, it's a long history. It really was following the earthquake. And then the election of Michel Martelly, who was the founder of the ruling party, the PHTK ruling party. They had a policy where they would actually hire out or send Haitian workers, cheap labor, export their labor, if you will, around Latin America, particularly to Chile and to Brazil, where, you know, hundreds of thousands of Haitians ended up migrating to work on large-scale construction projects. For Brazil, it was the World Cup Stadium, and then, of course, there were the Olympics. And when 2016 rolled around, those construction projects were over, and tens of thousands of Haitians suddenly found themselves competing for labor with the local labor force. And that, of course, meant that there was a lot of demonizing that occurred. There was some violence both in Chile and Brazil against Haitian families and workers. And so a lot of Haitians decided they were going to leave. And it has been a long march. It's really started in 2016. We're just now seeing that wave hit the U.S. border. Just amazing photographs of parents with their children on their back crossing the Rio Grande, children crying on their shoulders, desperate families. And, of course, many of them have been sustained, and largely how Haitians are sustained in Haiti, which is, you know, you got a cell phone, you can call a loved one in the United States, and you can get money wired to you. So it has been a long sojourn, a long trip for many of these families, many of them having walked and or gotten rides as they can, if they've scraped together money for buses on the Pan American Highway. And so we finally saw that with over 10,000 Haitians under that bridge in Del Rio after crossing the Rio Grande. Just desperate people looking for the possibility of a better life. Certainly when we saw the deportations happen, it was heartbreaking, especially on the tarmac at Toussaint Louverture Airport, as we saw some of the first planes landing with many of these refugee families. There was a tussle on Monday where they just simply did not know where they were. This was not a country they're returning to that they recognized. Many of them trying to climb back onto the plane, and the crew, in a very panicked way, pulling the stairway away and closing, slamming the door of the airplane very dramatically, and Haitians weeping as the plane pulled away and left them, abandoned them in a country that they no longer recognize.
Oh, I mean, it's just heartbreaking scenes, Kevin. And as you rightfully say, I mean, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks really has been heartbreaking. But of course, it's not just Haitians that were under that bridge. What happens to the Dominicans, the Venezuelans, as well as some of the Cubans that were there as well?
Well, it was mostly, as I understand, the Haitians that were the majority of that population. There were other nationalities there, but certainly the Haitians became the first priority and preoccupation of the Biden administration, particularly of the Border Patrol. We saw those awful images of the Border Patrol on horseback, whipping Haitians, corralling them like animals with their horses, lassoing some of them, trying to get them away from crossing the Rio Grande over toward the Texas border with Mexico. I would say that the U.S. immigration policy is as tilted against Haitians and destructive as has been U.S. foreign policy in Haiti itself. You know, these are compounded tragedies that have happened over decades of attempts by the international community, primarily led by the United States, who has played an outsized role in that country. And there's no other way to describe that foreign policy except a failure. It has left that country a shambles. Gangs run entire sectors of the capital, other parts in the countryside. The Haitian police are corrupt. We know that the PHTK ruling party has been implicated, along with the police, in drug trafficking on the island. It is a mess, and it is largely of the international community's own making. And now, in many ways, those poor workers who were basically farmed out by the PHTK government. Remember, the PHTK government also received kickbacks from the Brazilian construction firms, from those Chilean construction firms. We understand there were kickbacks in the local consulates in Santiago and in Rio de Janeiro. And so the PHTK party, which came to power by virtue of the largesse of the United States of U.S. support, is also behind this refugee crisis. There was no consideration given to them once those construction projects, once the work dried out. They were largely abandoned. And as I said, it's been family and friends who've been keeping them alive, as they have been keeping the Haitian population itself inside of Haiti alive.
I mean, you at the start of that answer, you mentioned just how heavy the police presence was there, and it remains at the moment, I guess, out of fear that the camp might flare up again. But under what policies, is the U.S. able to deport these Haitians? And talk to me then about why it's inhumane, or why the special envoy at least feels that way, and as a result have strongly withdrawn.
Well, Foote did resign. He was a special envoy appointed by the Biden administration. He resigned in protest of what he called an inhuman policy towards Haitian refugees. And they are refugees. These are refugees from abuse in Latin America at the hands of their own government. And, of course, sending them back into a house on fire, basically, which is what Haiti is. Listen. Food is so expensive. People are barely getting by. There's no infrastructure in the country. Again, gangs are running roughshod. The president was assassinated, in July. There's the institutions of that country have been destroyed since the U.S.-supported 2004 coup. It has never recovered. And so, there's that old saying, if you broke it, you bought it. And in many cases, this is the chickens coming home to roost again, a very failed policy of the international community. They've let Haiti down. And, of course, we have to do what we can. Listen, I have friends and family in Haiti. I want them out, for God's sake. I would love to have them here. We need to recognize and take responsibility for the role that our government has played in that country. And the least that we can do is give these people a fair chance to come to this country. Of course, it's not the same. They didn't work with the U.S. military in Afghanistan. They're not going to get those special visas, They didn't work in that failed aspect of U.S. foreign policy. But yet, still, they are the result of a failed U.S. policy. And I believe that we have an obligation to help them. And reopening the Chrome Detention Center in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, which I've heard is being fielded as a recent alternative, is no alternative at all. That's just going backward. That's creating the wrong optics. And it certainly is interesting, as you brought up, how Haitians are treated differently from other refugees from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Central America.
Haitians, of course, Kevin, are not just going to be dropped off in this house that's on fire, as you mentioned, and just stay there. This will obviously lead to, we're not exactly sure, but there'll be more action to come out of this. What do you expect to happen after this?
Well, and let's not forget that Haitians are still fleeing that country, that house on fire. We've heard reports of there's a new operation happening between Haiti and Colombia, where there are people who are, I don't know what else to call them, except seafaring coyotes. If you're familiar with the term coyote, normally it's traditionally somebody in Mexico who you pay money to, who helps you get across the border to the United States. Well, we're seeing now by ship that people are fleeing Haiti, and that there's this new business that's cropped up where people are paying as much as $1,000 U.S. to get out of Haiti into Colombia, and then from Colombia, of course, up the Pan American Highway. The hope is to get into the United States. So this is not over by a long shot, and the only solution is that Haitians their sovereignty be respected, that they be allowed to recuperate their institutions, the police, the judiciary, the courts, reform the prisons without the interference of the United States and the international community, allow Haitians to come together to heal themselves, to lead to real, open, free, and independent elections, which will take time. And so there's proposals to do that, but I'm still seeing that my government has not learned its lesson. It is still meddling, as is the so-called core group, which is the large nations that the United States is the leadership of, that consider their interests directly related to Haiti, that of course developed out of the 2004 coup. I don't see that they've learned the lesson, and unfortunately, the Haitians are going to suffer for it yet again.
Painful. Kevin Pina, thank you for taking your time to chat to us this morning. Kevin Pina, coming out of California. He is the head of the Haiti Info Project there, just talking to us about what really is a humanitarian crisis for the people of Haiti.